Okay, we are live. And before we start, I want to say hi to everyone, but also I want to let you know that since we all have the mic, I need to put out this disclaimer. Anyone that grabs a mic, they agreed that we're going to be live streaming this, record this, cutting this up in snippets, and that we'll be distributing the content. So welcome to the PR and Journalism panel discussion. And Brent, the mic is yours.
Hi, Tonya. How are you? And thanks for co-hosting for me.
My pleasure.
Welcome to Twitter Spaces and welcome to PR and Journalism panel discussion, sponsored by Social Chats, South Florida. And I'm happy to have an esteemed panel of guests here, and happy to welcome Terry Michaels, the VP of the Association of Women in Communication, South Florida chapter, to lead us in a mindfulness breathing exercise before we start the panel. The mic is yours, Terry.
Thank you, Brent. Welcome, everyone. Okay, wherever you are, standing, sitting down, or laying down, go ahead and close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Exhale through your mouth. Again, inhale. And exhale through your mouth. One more time. Inhale through your nose. And exhale. With your eyes closed, relax your face. Relax your jaw, your neck, your shoulders. Visualize any stress that you're holding goes down your arms and out through your fingertips. Relax your chest, your torso, your hips. Let it all go. Visualize the stress going down your legs, out through your toes. And you're completely relaxed. Gently breathing in and out through your nose. And that's all I want you to think about. Just think about and visualize the air going in and out through your nose, nice and gentle. And if any other thoughts come in your mind, visualize them as clouds in the sky just passing by. And I'm going to have some closing thoughts here. To heal illness, begin by restoring balance. Find ways to create balance in your life. Cast all negativity in a positive light and let go of any fears that block the flow of vital energy within your body, mind, and spirit. Namaste. May the divine in me honor the divine in you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that awesome. Thank you for being here, Terry, for the awesome mindfulness and meditation exercise.
You're very welcome.
It's very appreciated.
You're very welcome, Brent.
So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panelists. And if everyone could please retweet this space. It's going to be a very interesting conversation, especially now in 2022. We're heading toward the end of 2022, and we're going to have a panel discussion on the difference between PR and journalism, and how much they're alike and how much they're not alike, and what is so different as what they are today compared to when you first started. So I'm going to go ahead and read out the bio for the PR The first one is Debbie Elicksen. She is a publicist, writer, speaker, and journalist who spent most of her adult life in a locker room. She provides a proactive and strategic approach to storytelling to help others build their brand and personal legacy and put their best face forward. Debbie Elicksen gumshoed her way into becoming a paid professional writer and publisher, told women couldn't work in sports. Well, she spent 20 plus years in the National Hockey League, 20 years in the Canadian football, and was public relations director for the California Angels farm team. Was the first woman to head a football conference in Canada and was inducted into the Alberta Sports Hall of Fame. She was the go-to person to get a book published and worked on over 150 books for self-published authors and traditional publishers. She has written and published 17 books of her own. Debbie is a pioneer in the live stream interview format, a speaker, and is the current producer and host of The Locker Room for Growth. She is also the brand ambassador and community manager for Stage 32. Welcome, Debbie. The next publicist is Emily Taffel-Cohen. She is the founder and CEO of MugsyPr and an award-winning publicist, social media strategist, and a brand experience consultant. She is also a proud member of the board of directors for the South Florida chapter of the Association for Women in Communication, the oldest women's communication organization in the United States, and a community activist volunteering with numerous local organizations. In 2021, Emily published a children's book, Don't Limit Me on What I Can Be. It is a motto she stands by, as she is also a popular public speaker, event planner, wedding officiant, owner of an Etsy shop, and a local performer, blogger, podcaster, wife, stepmom of 4. Welcome, Emily. And then we have Tonya McKenzie. She is the founder of Sand and Shores Marketing, public relations and leadership firm. She is a Los Angeles County Commissioner of Alcohol and Other Drugs, an author and a public relations expert specializing in building community, brand awareness, and trust. Tonya consults organizations and she coaches small business owners and leaders on the rise, helping them magnify their messages and elevate their leadership in their careers, communities, and the media landscape. Mrs. McKenzie is also the host of Leaders and Learners podcast, speaking to leaders, experts, authors, and personalities to discover and discuss the story behind the story. Tonya currently serves as the first African-American woman elected to the Redondo Beach Chamber of Commerce, Board of Directors, the City of Redondo Beach GPAC, General Plan Advisory Council, Vice President of the Black Public Relations Society, Los Angeles, the Redondo Beach Emergency Crisis Council, and serves on the Redondo Beach Police Community Engagement Board. Her work with the chambers and business associations has shaped her into an advocate and valuable resource for small businesses and community organizations. Tonya McKenzie can be found highlighted in the pages of Amazing Moms, Parents of the 21st Century. As a young gun violence survivor, she has become a dedicated youth advocate. She is the author of a memoir titled A Child's Memories of Cartoons and Murder, addressing non-combat PTSD, predatory behavior, generational dysfunction, and domestic violence. Tonya has been married for over 21 years and has 4 kids, including a set of twins. Welcome, Tonya. So we're going to go ahead and go to our journalist. We have Mike Robinson. He is a 2-time Ohio State champion football coach and a former high school head coach at Boucher. After studying at the University of Toledo, Mike started his coaching career and his businesses, Fourth and Goal Training, LLC. After 7 years of coaching high school ball, Mike turned to a career in media as a host on TV for BCSN and the sideline reporter for the Toledo Football. Mike lives in Northwest Ohio and with his wife, Tiffany, daughter Riley Rose, and son, Mike Jr. Welcome, Mike. And then we have Michael Stephen Wagner. He has worked as a photographer for Live and Record and Hit It Off Media and founded the site Mike Rocks Milwaukee in his late teens to take photos at concerts. In college, Wagner worked for the school newspaper. He quit photographing shows in 2016 to focus on other ventures, including a journalistic investigational Me Too piece about his abusers. Welcome, Michael. And then we have Rose Horowitz. She is a Pulitzer-nominated journalist and the founder of #Women2Follow, a global hashtag trend that had a reach of 12 million views in its first 2 weeks. She also creates unique Women to Follow programs for organizations and businesses. Since 2021, she has hosted 23 episodes of live stream Women to Follow shows. featuring prominent business leaders, journalists, photographers, and authors. She has been named as a host to watch by the Twitter Spaces account. Rose has been published in the New York Times, Forbes, the Los Angeles Times, and many other publications. She has also created content for brands such as Citi and Morgan Stanley. Rose produced 250 daily consecutive episodes for digital innovator and Professor Suresh Srinivasan's COVID-19 show, which launched as the lockdown began. She hosted 30 episodes and booked many guests. Of the 457 guests, 56% were women, including journalist Maria Ressa, who received the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize. She also helped conceive and launch a weekly medical live stream and podcast show called She's on Call. Rose has published poetry in poetry journals and has studied with poets that include Marie Ponsard, Sapphire, Jean Valentine, and Elaine Ecri. One of Rose's poems was published in the award-winning Dare to Dream, Change the World, a children's poetry anthology published in 2012 by Kane Miller Books. Last but not least, Amy Wood. There's nothing our Reverend Emmy Award-winning anchor Amy Wood has loved more than over 30 plus years at 7 News than connecting with her viewers. Amy currently anchors the 4 p.m., 5 p.m., and 6 p.m. newscasts and 7 News at noon. She's been 27 years anchoring the late news and solo arriving at the 10 p.m. news for nearly 15 years, plus a decade on 7 News at 7. Amy's award-winning interactive anchoring has been honored by the South Carolina's Broadcasters Association and the Radio and Television Digital News Association. National journalism organizations like the Paley Center for Media, the Poynter Institute, and Renner's Journalism Institute have relied on Amy to share her innovative works. Amy served as a member of the Greenville Rotary Club. The Girl Scouts of the Mountains to Midlands honored Amy as a Woman of the distinction, and the SCJCs named her the state's Community Service Award winner. Welcome, Amy. The mic is yours, Brent. Thank everyone for being here. We're so excited about you, about everyone being here. It's going to be a wonderful conversation.
So the first question for all the panelists: how did you get into journalism, or PR, or public relations, also known as PR?
Should we? Who should we start first? Oh, Tonya. Go ahead, Tonya.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. So I got into PR about 20 years ago. I was working for YMCA. It's a nonprofit. They needed to build a new building. They didn't have the money. Most companies, when they don't have money, what's the first thing to go? Marketing. But we still needed to get this stuff done. So I started reaching out to some of the journalists because they're amazing, and some of the TV anchors, radio personalities, and started telling them the story about what we were doing and why we were doing it. They started picking up on it, getting some great exposure. And I realized when they didn't pick up on what we were doing anymore, or they were getting bored with it, or the story wasn't really hitting, I would start asking them what was it that they were looking for to cover. And, would either start creating stories for them to write about, or just pulling stories out of some of our employees and community members. But at that moment, at that time, that is when I fell in love with PR, because I knew that when the budget is low, PR is the way to go, right? When you're trying to get the attention, that authentic message across to your community, and you have a journalist that really understands, one, the community that they are connecting with, and two, what those people want to hear about, you can have a great relationship with journalists and with correspondents if you have an authentic relationship and you guys, you talk, you connect. But it was over 20 years ago. I graduated, 99? Yeah, so around 2001. And it really was based around the desire to get the word out about this project that we were working on. And since that time, we opened up the New Eye, raised $1 million. But my relationship with some of those journalists is still strong today. We actually reconnected on Twitter, of all places, a couple of years ago. So That was in the Bay Area. I live in LA now, but looking at what we created and the relationships that we built, that was over 20 years ago. But it really came down to trying to get the word out about a project and about people in this community without having a budget. And it just proved to be the very best way for it to happen. And I've been in love with PR ever since.
Who's next, Rose or Emily?
I think it's Emily.
Emily, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Brent. So my story is actually pretty similar. I also started a little over 20 years ago now. And I started while I was in college. I started in college as a theater major, and I was going to be an actress and a stage manager and do Broadway. And then we were doing a show. I was at the University of Miami, and we needed to promote the show. And I started calling journalists and reaching out and talking about the show. And I realized that as much as I love acting, I really also love creating stories and pitching them out and talking to people. And it kind of went hand in hand with theater for me overall. So I switched my major into international business and marketing. I switched my school to Nova Southeastern. I minored in film and theater, and I just like dove headfirst into PR. And I got my first job out of college at a small PR firm in Fort Lauderdale that represented the Fort Lauderdale International Boat Show, which is the world's largest in-water yacht show. And I fell in love with luxury lifestyle PR. And we started doing luxury lifestyle, experiential public relations. We do a lot with event marketing and social media. When that came around, jumped headfirst into that. And 10 years ago, started my own firm, MugsyPr, and have run that ever since. And just absolutely know that my life would be completely different if it weren't for PR and then the amazing journalists that I have met along the way who have helped to tell these stories for my clients. So I'm excited to be here to talk to everybody today and talk about that relationship, because it is truly life-changing when you have the right database of people to connect with and to promote the messages that we want to put out there.
Rose.
Hi, thank you very much for having me on this show. It's a great panel. I started out when I was 10, I guess you would say. I was always liked to write, and I started a family newspaper. And in college, I wrote for one of the college newspapers. And then I went to graduate school, and I took a test when I finished for the Associated Press to be a vacation relief staffer, among other things that I was, interested in. And I got a call like 2 weeks before I was graduating from the AP bureau chief in Pittsburgh, who said, "Hey, what you doing?" So I flew to Pittsburgh. Lived. I'm a New Yorker. Had lived here in New York City all my life, and would open the bureau at 6 a.m. To check other papers, Allegheny County papers for news, and was doing the 12 o'clock noon update for all the for local stations. So I was writing for broadcast, which I really hadn't done, but you sink or swim in that business. Went to Charleston, West Virginia, worked for AP there a little while, and then came back to New York and was a reporter at a business paper, the Journal of Commerce, which was owned at the time by Knight Ridder. And I was covering international trade and shipping. Began to do I did a lot of, had a lot of scoops, and started to do investigative reporting. And that was the series I was nominated for about the U.S. Food for Peace program. And so my first job was at the AP. Then I worked at newspapers, and and then started when I started on and worked freelanced my whole life. I mean, many years. And now I've become a producer since the pandemic and have my own show. I created my hashtag in 2018 and my show in 2021.
Tonya.
So, Tonya McKenzie, did you want to share? You have your hands up. I wasn't quite sure.
Oh no, I'm sorry. That was from
Okay.
before.
So, can I call on Amy?
Yes, Tonya.
Amy.
Hello. I think I've got some kind of weird transformer thing on. I'm trying to turn it off. I was playing with buttons. Am I speaking normally? Can you hear me normally without some weird voice? Anybody? Let me see.
No, you
I can
sound
hear you
perfect.
Okay,
normally. You
okay.
sound
I
fine.
just don't know how to get rid of this thing. Somehow it's okay. Anyway, I started out. First of all, thank you for including all of us. This is fascinating, and I'm already loving hearing everyone's story. Everyone has such a cool story about the way they wind up where they are, and I love to hear all about it. My story, it was a high school mini course in journalism, and they took us to the local newspaper, and the editor was writing a headline, and he was really just doing it to like type words into the machine to show us how it worked. But I, being a little bit of a smarty pants, said, "Well, that's not a very good headline for that story." And he was like, "Well, what would you write?" And I said something. And a week later, he called my teacher and was like, "She seems to have some good instincts. I think she should come over here after school and, volunteer and, we'll let her test out the journalism waters." And so I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. So I started going and doing the typical sort of print journalism stuff you hear about, writing obituaries, going to city council meetings. I mean, pretty important stuff because it teaches you about fact checking and all, being accurate and all of those important things. But it also is just, kind of like out of the textbook, old school way you start out in the world of journalism. And then I had been in performing arts as a youngster, so it was kind of interesting as I started to progress into heading to college to think about merging the performance aspect of broadcast journalism with the guts and meat of journalism. And so I started looking at the broadcast path. The schools that I went to SUNY Oswego my first 2 years, and it was not a broadcast per se program. It was just a communications program. And then I transferred to American University, which also didn't have a broadcast program. It had a communications school. And so I graduated with a communications degree and took some, broadcast emphasis. So that was kind of how I stumbled into it, was basically a high school tour.
Mike.
Hey everybody, I'm happy to be here. Sorry guys, I was eating, but excited to be here with all you guys. It's also really cool to hear everybody's story and how everybody got to where they're at as well. For me, I started a small business, and what you learn is when you start a small business. I was 23 years old, fresh out of college. Didn't really have much. And I was making my money by working at a pizza spot called Pizza Populous, being a delivery driver. Actually I did everything in the pizza spot because I had to figure out how could I add more value working there so they didn't never cut me. I never wanted to get cut, always want to work. And so what I realized when I started my business was I didn't have money to go advertise, and I knew I had a really good product, which was sports training and just, the connections that I had within the sports world for student athletes, and really got involved with PR, not knowing that it was really PR. So me and my partner, we went around to every single high school here in Northwest Ohio, and we sat down with every coach, built those relationships, and as we're sitting them telling them about what our program is, they're offering us coaching jobs. We're like, no, we don't want to coach for you guys. We just want to help, so it's kind of funny, seeing, the difference of, going to these people and presenting what you have, to their face versus sending an email. And so that's when we learn, the power of face-to-face meeting and how much more we can get out of a handshake deal. And so that was my introduction to PR. And also within where we're at, there's a lot of different, journalists who we wanted to get our information out to as well. So when I went to college, I went for history. I didn't take any communication classes. I took one business class. So I really didn't have any background in it. So it was really all just figuring it out through Google, through going to the Small Business Development Center, the Minority Business Development Center, and just kind of learning these things along the way. And so how journalism came through was just through the process of building my business and building relationships. I've got to meet so many different high school prospects. I got offered jobs to do recruiting and scouting and writing for different entities. And then that also just flipped from that to like literally overnight getting a phone call from a television station saying, "Hey, local high school athletes, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I know quite a few." So I've worked with over 15,000 student athletes in the area since 2010. And they call and ask. I'm like, "Yeah, I know a few guys." And they was like, "You speak pretty well." I'm like, "Yeah, I think I know how to talk." And then it was like, "You want to do some television?" I'm like, "Well, I've never done television in my life." And they're like, "Well, I think you'll be fine. Come in, do an interview." Like we did a little quick set. Then next thing you know, like 3 days later, I was doing a 5.5 hour live TV show. And that's what I've been doing for the past 7 years, on Friday nights during the football season. And I write articles for the different networks and entities. So kind of have a little mixed bag of journalism and PR. And I'm more on the journalism side now, I guess. So that's how I got to where I'm at. And I'm rocking and rolling with it.
Michael or Debbie?
I'll go.
Yeah, I'll let Michael go first.
So I would say I started photography as a teenager at concerts, and then founded a site called Mike Rocks Milwaukee, networked my way into working for a site called Live and Wrecked, and also hit it off media. In college, I was a newspaper photographer, so photojournalist basically. And then in college also I delivered newspapers, so I've been on that end of promoting and the distribution of news via that route. And then also went back to journalism when I entered a guardianship with my mom and dad and some legal battles there, and had chosen journalism as a means of countering their actions. Recently made my third appearance on TMZ as well, and that's basically what I do. So.
Debbie?
Yeah, I'm a little like Mike in the sense that I was really looking at being actually I wanted to get in pro sports really bad, so the National Hockey League. So I was looking for any way or form to get in, and I found my way in as a journalist, and through that it kind of morphed into PR. Probably my very first official PR gig was when I was PR director for the Edmonton Trappers AAA baseball club, which was a farm team of the California Angels. And I basically felt like I had the dream job. It was pretty incredible. And from there, I kind of mixed both journalism and PR, and still stayed in sports as a journalist, and did copywriting with the Calgary Herald and other publications to probably make more money. And so I've kind of morphed it all and then created my own PR. And then, I was just contracting out. So I did event planning as well. And I had this really fantastic 6-year contract with the Canadian government for Calgary Stampede, doing PR for a trade booth of all things, and trying to cull stories from the display booths. Like they had 6 services, Canadian government services, at these booths, and it changed every year. And there would be interactive events and that. And my job was to find a story out of those and get the media to come and do a story. So yeah, I kind of mix it up, and I'm still mixing it up. And it's really hard to know which one is PR and which one is journalism after a while. And I have the unique perspective in being in front and behind the camera and around the camera. So there you go. That's my side of it.
So since we've been in a pandemic, how has journalism or PR been different? Emily?
Yeah, so I can answer that one because for us, it changed quite a bit. In 2019 and going into 2020, my firm was very much on the experiential marketing side. So, on the concept of, we had a lot of clients that had products, and our goal was to create these tangible experiences where we had a lot of influencers or a lot of events where we had people coming out and being able to really interact with these products, and especially in food and beverage, things like that. And then the pandemic hit, and we had to really figure out how to engage the media and how to engage these influencers in a brand new way online. And as everyone did, we switched a lot of things virtually, and we focused on a lot of virtual events. We went back to storytelling, which was never out of the mix, but it really became super important to tell human impact stories and stories about the people behind the brands as well. And I feel like we had like a great run of just like some phenomenal brand promotion. And then it came back to the people, as it always does, and it should. And so for us, that changed a lot. We actually found ourselves strengthening our relationships with media during the pandemic because it kind of broke down that wall between everybody. There was journalists who were now doing like cooking classes. There's a few that I'm thinking of specifically that like they were holding cooking classes online. And so I would join in and just like watch them cook and interact with them that way. And at the same time, they were seeing me at home with my kids and homeschooling and, dressing up in costumes, trying to come up with fun stuff to do in the house with them. And the journalists and the publicists, I feel like really related as humans with one another for the first time in a while too. Sometimes we don't do that as we're all pitching and trying to come up with stories. And so for me, I feel like I came out of the pandemic with some creative ideas, some really awesome hybrid events, and some newfound knowledge of technology and ways to use tech to connect um, with media and with consumers and B2B and everything. And again, just some really strong relationships that I didn't have before with media. And so, yeah, I would say that's how things changed for our business for sure.
Who wants to answer the question next on the panel?
I'll add, I don't really think for myself a whole lot has changed because from my perspective, most of my work has been digital anyways. So it was really SSDD in a way. The only difference is that live events were canceled. So it was hard to kind of promote. I mean, you're hamstrung with the PR for live events because you just, they just weren't there. And then today it's since, or not today, but it's coming out of COVID, when you had some restrictions and not everything was unrestricted, it was still kind of hamstrung event planners and what they could do and couldn't do. So I kind of steered away from event planning. So because it was, I couldn't figure out how to do it virtually, without, you just without a Zoom. So that was what changed for me.
Amy?
Yeah, I think one of the factors that changed in general is that Zoom interviews became something you could use on television, which changed the dynamic of how quickly you could get in with someone for an expert piece of advice. And even now in breaking news, I mean, we can all jump on a call with someone and record and flip that around for television so fast, whereas we used to have to wait till the next day because we couldn't arrange anything. And so it's changed the dynamic. I think we all have each other's numbers now. We all know how to reach sort of certain people that became go-to people during COVID. And so, and not to say that you can't begin to help people find go-to people, because I think we as journalists are in this challenging time where the people that are coming in behind the oldies and goodies like me are super young, very inexperienced, especially in the middle and small markets. And so they could use, a helping hand of hey, here's a go-to doctor, here's a go-to retired police officer who would know what's going on when such and such breaks, and whatever the other scenarios, I mean, millions of them that there could be. I just think it's a good time to keep um, doing sort of what happened in COVID, but even more so now with these young journalists, because I think they're always looking for stories to pitch. They're doing more than any reporters have in history, especially in broadcasting, where they're doing multiple shows a day, creating content for that, creating content for the web, creating content for social, and they're still supposed to have 3 story pitches for the next day. So this is an opportunity in the PR world, I think, to reach journalists. But I would just, as a caveat or as a ask from the journalists, I would just ask that, especially since we do have younger journalists out there that are not as used to working in that world, that being a very full of integrity, not pulling the wool over someone's eyes, doing anything like sort of not unethical, but you know what I mean, like a little bit below board with that, I think would be inappropriate. And obviously it's inappropriate, but I think we're more vulnerable probably to being taken by it. But at the same time, we need, I think, PR ideas more than ever to help us fill the volume of what's going on out there, because yes, there's shootings and all of the rough stuff that happens, but I think we also have room in our newscast, and the audience has a desire to see more things that are not just death and destruction all the time. And I think that's the PR sort of angle in some ways, is here's your emotional break in the newscast, or here's your chance to give the audience a little bit of a break with something that's encouraging or positive that's going on in our neck of the woods, or a company that's adding jobs or creating opportunities. And there's just so many good stories to tell, and I think you guys are the key to doing that at times.
Rose or Tonya?
I'll go. Amy, great to hear your experience. Before the pandemic, a few years, like 2 years before that, I became an assistant managing editor at a local paper. And what you're saying about young journalists is, I mean, it was true 5 years ago. I think, when I started out, it was true too. I started out, in print, but you went from and broadcasters I knew would start at a very small market, move to the next tier, to the next tier. So there's always young, inexperienced reporters out there. I think what's changed is the amount of people who can write now, because journalism is totally, upside down. So in my community where my kids grew up, there is no paper anymore, period. So there's no one covering school board meetings. And being at this local paper was really interesting because I hadn't been in the newsroom like that for a long time. And in some ways, everything was the same in that stories. Reporters had to file, so much content now, and then everything was different in that everything was online first. So if a reporter was out in the field, or just because on the way to work and you saw a fire, you stopped, took pictures, and sent in a tweet, and no one was reviewing that tweet. So in the older days, somebody was always reviewing that tweet and that copy that was going out. And I've been to some meetings with some New York Times editors, and they say nothing goes out until it's read, until an editor has read it. So, journalism is upside down. I started to get into Twitter because I saw journalists were on Twitter, and loved the community. Started studying with Sri Srinivasan, who I mentioned, who is taught 20 years at the Columbia Journalism School, and then was head of digital for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I was learning what's an ideal tweet. And then, in 2018, I created this tweet that went viral. And then with the pandemic, everything changed again because we were supposed to actually have, he was supposed to do another an in-person, what he does, a social media weekend. Journalists come from, a few states. They have like 200, I don't know, the 80, 60 panelists, and no one, couldn't do it. So they, in 10 days, made it virtual. And this journalist 3 said, I want to start a live stream show about COVID, all aspects of COVID. And, loving news, I said, I'm in. So I became a producer. And there were 2 producers, 1 host, and I co-hosted a lot as I got guests. But we did a daily show for an hour, every day. And we created a community of people who would tune in from India and Bangladesh and China, because they could and because everybody was home. So, and I had never really been in, didn't do any live streaming or any kind of broadcasting in my career. So everything changed in the pandemic. So
Tonya.
that's my perspective.
I love that, Rose. Thanks for sharing. One of the things that I've seen especially when COVID happened, there was a lot of layoffs. There was a lot of people that shuffled around or outlets that disappeared. Some were getting bought out. A lot of journalists were getting laid off or getting more into freelancing, which actually gave many of us that do write sometimes the opportunity to do more freelancing, on top of the fact that a lot of outlets needed extra help. So even if they wanted your story, they might not have the journalist to write it. So you were left as the PR professional many times in creating the content. They would go over it, and it got so bad actually to one. At one point there were some outlets that actually pretty much just printed the press release sometimes that were sent out. So I think because of COVID, things did change a lot, not always for the better, but for those of us that do write and get concerned about the angle maybe that a story could go in, it allowed for us to have a little more direction or give a little more direction about the story, and just get a lot more collaborative with the journalists because they were so shorthanded and needed good stories. I mean, my God, it was like COVID everything. COVID everything. And when we come out of COVID, there's still so many people left without jobs or scrambling and trying to figure it out. So I do think that the landscape definitely changed, for the better and the worse. And those of us that do like to write and have a little more direction with our writing and, the direction of the story, it wound up being a benefit. So that's been my experience.
Mike or Michael?
My experience has been pretty good so far. I picked up a job during COVID as a freelance with the Prep Network, and that's kind of my first real outside, actually like, writing articles and getting into outside of, the broadcast journalism. I do radio and broadcast. And so now I hit the trifecta with the writing, and that's been really cool. I think it's a lot of need for it. My services have been, rendered by a lot of different, companies that I never thought would, look to, work with me. So it's been really nice. But it's still so much more to learn about it, and I think the big thing too is for a newcomer like me, I think the first time I started doing some independent work, I think I was getting ripped off, with what they were paying me. So I think it was some education errors that that I didn't understand, that industry. So I'm thinking, hey, this is a decent amount of money for an article. And I talked to some other people and they're like, hey man, you better go ask for a little bit more money than what you're getting. And then so I think it's been good on the journalism side, and PR. Like I said, I don't really have much experience there, but it's all mushed together, when you do a little bit of everything. So, yeah, that's how I've seen it since COVID.
And Michael?
I'd say, well, what was the question? I apologize.
The question was, during COVID, were there any differences for you in journalism or PR?
Sorry, I had to ask because I rugged. But the thing about what I was doing with the piece I was working is it actually enabled me to sit down and sift through what I had collected, and I ended up releasing what I had recorded before COVID, after COVID.
Yeah, and not that this is part of the space, but Tonya Scholz has a PR agency, and she does amazing press releases. I just have to appreciate Tonya Scholz for her amazing press releases. And if you need a press release, Tonya Scholz is your go-to person because she has a PR agency.
Thank you, Brent. But when you think about PR and you think about journalism, it's like we're all content creators. And so for myself personally, I mean, I founded my company in 2006, but back then I was learning how to do social media press releases, and most people don't do that. So the different ways of different connection that people do to get the information out for their clients. And Emily and I, we talk about this quite a bit because she builds great relationships, but I build great relationship, but my niche is longevity and age reversal. So I work with researchers, and she does a lot more social media. I look at social media too, but I have to be careful what is said or done, or because just like the pandemic, if you say that word, the word, you say that word, you publish that word, they take you right offline. So as a publicist, I find that you kind of like wear a lot of hats. But I also want to ask you, I've seen a lot of journalists become publicists, especially in Washington, D.C. They're making like a lot of money, actually. So, Amy, I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on that? The people changing their hats along the way?
I think what you're seeing is the changing of the business, which is the salaries have shifted downward to a level where we are not able to retain people long term in the business. I really personally see journalism, unfortunately, becoming probably something people do while they're young, and then they move on to something that can help support a family down the road, which is unfortunate because I think then you're going to start to lose, people that are more experienced and all those things that come with higher salaries. So yeah, I don't know if the industry will wake up at some point, because it's getting to the point now where, I've seen a couple of broadcast groups announce that they're now going to pay 100% healthcare. They're now going to pay a higher minimum salary start. So they're starting to react to the competitiveness that's out there in other industries. Will all of them do that eventually? Who knows? And will the cost benefit, work out for them? Will there be ROI? I don't know. But I think it's happening. That's becoming an issue. And I think that's honestly a motivating force, is between the demands of journalism, the crazy hours, the having to work weekends or holidays. I mean, all the things that come with the job, the stress, and the level of sometimes almost trauma that people can experience through some of the stories they cover. Does that all balance out with the salary enough to stay in? Does the passion keep you there, or do you at some point burn out the candle and decide to move on to something else? And I think that's what we're starting to see happen.
Tonya?
I was going to say the same thing, talk about the salaries, but I also wanted to say one of the best things that have come out of all of this is audio platforms like this, right? So when a journalist and publicist can all hop on platforms such as this and discuss a hot topic or something that is imminent in our culture, it definitely allows for some relationship building, because I think it takes all of us to be able to make this thing work well. So that for me, that was one of the positives, like a PR lunch hour that we do on Spaces, and opportunities like this to be in a space together and talk about some of the more relevant stories.
And also, Tonya McKenzie's Space PR lunch hour is a great space because she's all about wanting people to share their wins so that everyone can celebrate and support the wins in journalism and PR.
I was going to add too that one of the other thoughts I had about PR folks and we're getting stories told, or having clients that have good stories to tell that somehow sometimes miss the mark with mainstream media. You have to remember too that a lot of your journalists have significant platforms as well, in the sense of their social media footprint. And so you can look in your area at some of the sort of leading influencers in journalism who have a good sized audience. And some I do it all the time. I do interviews. There's stories that they just were maybe a little too deep or a little too detailed for television, but they're still really interesting, or it's a good conversation to have about an issue or a a solution to a problem that the community is facing. And I'll just do an on camera or a live stream interview, or on my own, and just do that on the social media sites. So it depends. I mean, you can kind of get creative, and you can help journalists get creative. I mean, we're always looking for an idea of a good interview to post or a good thing to follow up on, and sometimes those interviews then can lead to a story, or even for your clients, inviting us to events. Like today I did a computer science event with the governors of South Carolina and Arkansas, and it was all like deep dive into computer science stuff, and I've walked out of there with probably 4, 5, 6 story ideas, 7 contacts, and it's only because I had the opportunity today to go in there and MC the event and hear from all these different speakers and panelists. And now I know so much more about that subject area, and I have an opportunity to there were businesses there, major manufacturers, Google was there. I mean, it was cool, and I think now I've got all these contacts, and when those issues pop up, I know who to call, I know what to do. And in the end result, some stories that probably would never have gotten told will wind up getting told.
Debbie?
Yeah, to follow up what Amy just said, that's one of the big things, not just from COVID, but just in general, because a lot of media have lost their jobs, and you are seeing many of them start basically create their own media and create a YouTube channel. So there is a lot of YouTube journalists who are former broadcasters and writers and from every walk of life. And also you can flush out the story. You can tell the stories that you want to tell. It's basically why I love doing my web show. And I think that's why Tonya and I got together in the first place, is because Tonya Scholz, because we were live streaming way back when live streaming was just a baby, and telling stories from people who had interesting things to say and interesting careers. So yeah, it's I think the digital space coupled with COVID has probably improved journalism in a way, because we can flush things out. If it's not seen on broadcast media, if you can't get it there, you can get it on YouTube.
And Debbie and I, like, we did this in 2012, Debbie, and we're like every Friday, even though we've never met in person, I had such a connection with her, and we had interviewed so many different people, and we didn't use the phone. Remember, it was back then. It was the computer.
Exactly. And and I was going to meet you in person. And that is where COVID came in, because I was just about to book my flight to Miami to see you, Cynthia, and Susie. And, then hell broke loose.
We'll meet each other either way. I know we will. I know that the four of us will finally meet each other and have a reunion, because I think every Friday in 2012 was an incredible time for us. And back then, technology and social media were starting out, and everyone was just the people we interviewed, and we can do, like, where are they now? But if you look at all the connection we all have built, and I think that that's the most important part. Like Amy was saying, like when she went to a meeting, she met all these different people, and she has all these different story ideas. So I think that's the key, is the connection. Rose, you have the mic is yours.
Yes, to some of the points Tanya and Amy were talking about, Debbie, the journalists that I was with in business journalism, most of them went on to become analysts at financial firms, because the money in journalism is, it's not there, uh, unless you make it to the very top, like in broadcast journalism, or maybe in print, but still lesser. The salaries are less. And so what I've seen, that's one thing I've seen journalists do. Another thing is that very big journalists, like at the Times or the Washington Post, they've left the paper to run their own Substack and get subscribers and have the subscribers pay for the news. So that's very different. And there's so many opportunities now to get your story out there. I mean, I now created a YouTube channel for my live stream show, and you can do everything with a phone. And I discovered that I was at a Pen America rally in 2016, and this poet, it was protesting some of the policies of the new administration, and a poet, Rita Dove, who was who was a poet laureate, spoke and read a poem, and there was a choir that sang, and I was taking some video, and I put it all together, and I could check everything on my phone. I could check what the name of this choir was, what their handle is. Rita Dove was on Twitter, and I put it out there, and and suddenly, I wasn't with the publication, so you really can create your space. It's very hard though to I think it's a tough business, but it always was a tough business. But I think because of the closing of what, 2,000 papers, or is that, I don't know what the number is, but it's like half the amount of journalists are in doing their work now. The good thing, like, about a space like Twitter Spaces, this audio space, is that yes, I would meet, when I was doing daily reporting, lots of PR people. They send me things. But I was curious when I saw this space that Tanya and some of her, and I guess Michelle were running. It was called PR Lunch Hour, and it was just interesting to hear the perspective. What were two different worlds in many ways. So there's some pearls for you. that helps.
The next
What about podcasts? You notice everyone has a podcast, and like Emily's like getting ready to do she'll have 3 podcasts pretty soon.
I will. I have 2 that are coming up, and we just got into like what we're calling season 2 of my first podcast, The Best Breakup Ever. And I'm loving podcasting. Like, we have found such a huge audience, and unexpectedly, like, zero marketing, just kind of put it out there at first, and people sort of flock to it. So of course I was like, why not do some more? But I did want to speak to the comment about Substack, because that has been really cool on the relationship side between publicists and journalists. I have started following several different journalists' Substacks where they're sending what they're working on for stories every day. So instead of me having to go out and pitch media or reach out to journalists and say, hey, what are you working on right now? You know, I know you usually write about this. Is this something, you know, you'd be interested in? Every single day I'm getting their newsletter where they are now requesting stories and saying what they're working on and telling a little bit about like their lives and you know, because you become a subscriber and you're paying, you kind of get this insight and insider's view as to what they're working on. And it has been absolutely invaluable for me on the journalism, like on the side of, you know, publicity for my clients. So for anybody who's not utilizing Substack in that way, whether it's a journalist, like reach out to us publicists, we will pay for the opportunities for our clients. And we love to connect. And if you're a publicist and you're not using Substack and reaching out, you know, and connecting with journalists, it's a great opportunity.
Can I add in the free choice, which I'm using, which is get review through Twitter. And I don't know what Substack costs. I hear it's pretty minimal, but this is actually a free one. And I'm doing it for the opposite reason of trying to build an email list, just to have, you know, that flexibility to not be completely, you know, social media dependent forever. And, you know, there will come a day where I step away from news. I don't know when that'll be, but when I do, I'm thinking that would be a fun way to keep a home base of some sort, almost like having a website and, you know, just producing content. It's almost, to me, it's an email, but I put it out twice a week, and it's more focused on like local events, cool stories, some of the stories that I mentioned that I tell on my own that I just for fun. But I kind of look at it as like a blog email, sort of. And I don't really get in. That's an interesting thing that you just shared there, because I don't really get into what we're working on or covering, but I might. I mean, now that you say that that's valuable and interesting to people, I may go there, which is really cool. But anyway, I just wanted to share that resource because it is free.
Emily?
No, I think my hand's still up from before. But thank you for sharing that free resource, because that's anything that's free and can save us a little bit on the budget, since they just raised the price on Cision and all those fun media list things.
So the next question for the panel is how has journalism and PR since changed since you got into it?
So I'll say for me, absolutely everything has changed since I got into it. I remember when I started, it was all about writing a press release and making media kits, like where we used to stuff folders, like print out hundreds of copies of things and stuff the folders and bring those to a press room and give those to journalists and desk sides and all of that. And now most of my team is virtual, and we're all like digital nomads all across the country and some across the world. Still doing the same work, just everything, you know, online now. I still absolutely value in-person contact, but I feel like just the way that we're doing everything really has changed over, for me, it's been a little over 20 years and it's completely different.
Yeah, for me, 35 years into news on the journalism side, I would say similarly, you know, is so fast paced. There is so much more in terms of content to fill. I mean, we're doing, you know, we used to do, I used to anchor 6 and 11. Now we're doing a 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, and 11, you know, so it's like all this content that needs to be created, all the website space, which is infinite, that is to be filled every day. So I think it's exciting because there is so much opportunity, both for us to tell stories and for you guys to pitch stories. And I think it's positive at some levels, but I also think It's a little scary for journalism. Again, I just worry about sort of institutional knowledge and sort of the conundrum of you don't know what you don't know kind of thing with so many of our young journalists. They're not even aware of what they're don't have in their feather cap of feathers yet, but they will get there, and I definitely fully support them. And if there are any young journalists out there who need some mentoring, please reach out.
Rose.
Yes, I think as Tanya and Amy said, totally the whole world that world has changed. Uh, when I would be at a business paper, my deadline was like 1:30 or something for the first edition. And now as a journalist, if you're a reporter at a paper or as a broadcast station, your deadline is every minute, just about. So, uh, and the volume, because you are feeding, an online site as well as, your main, if it's your broadcast or a paper or a digital publication, is totally different. And and what I said before, I think anyone can pick up, a pencil and write or broadcast. So it's opened the field. At the same time, I think it's the closing of many outlets have um, meant that more journalists and more writers are fighting to get copy and copy, and the amount that you can get paid, the money that you can get paid keeps shrinking. And one problem, and I see my friend Jennifer Navarrete is here, and she's talking about creating content on the blockchain. And for someone like me, that might be a great idea, in the same way that, having a newsletter would in some ways, because I would own that content. So I wrote for publications now that you can't find. This local publication in my hometown is no longer, there's no record of it. Uh, you can't find it. They just didn't pay to keep the archives up. And so, the story that I won the Connecticut Press Association Award, you can't find it. You can't find it. So, there's that's another thing, owning your content. And how do you do that?
Who on the panel wants to answer the question next?
Well, just to follow up with Rose, I just have to tell you that I recently was reunited with my storage and everything went in there basically 10 or so years ago. And this is before they have been saving archives on the even more recently on online. So all these, oh my God, there was like 2,000 articles, I think, that I had written for the Herald and other publications that I had fortunately had ripped out pages of, like copies of it. So I had a physical copy of the story, but there is no digital version. So I bought a scanner and I I painfully scanned every single one of them, so at least I have them digitized, even if as a JPEG or a PNG, even if I can't, or PDF rather, even if I can't share the link. So it is. You're right. You need to, at least when the thing is live, screen shoot it or do anything you can to save it.
But the thing is that, yes, I do have, the biggest stories. I have scanned them. I have hard copies in the basement. And when we moved, I made sure to scan them, and I do have like a file of stories. But if I'm applying for, if I'm pitching a new story, or I'm applying for a job somewhere, it's not very current to send, who's going to open up a picture, like that. Everybody's looking for the link to the story. So anyway, it doesn't look great when you have to do it that way.
Who wants to take a turn next?
Well, I manage my website, and if anything happens to it, there's this thing called Wayback Machine, and it's supposed to like you can go back and look at all the different things. So you can go to anybody's website and see what it looks like. Let's say when they first started, it's called Wayback Machine. But when it comes to Web3, I always look at Jennifer because we talk about the blockchain and everything, and a lot of my doctors and research are talking about that as getting into putting their research onto the blockchain. But as far as for me myself, I know I've done this for my clients. Like as far as the websites are concerned, if you publish something and it's your website, you publish it. But if something happens and you can't, and you didn't back it up or you didn't have it, there's this, it's called Wayback Machine. You can go there and it, look all the way back to the date that you're looking for, and it depends depending on when it gets crawled and indexed. So it's kind of different compared to how it was 10 years ago. I didn't know much about Wayback Machine. I don't even know it was even around back then. But today, that's what a lot of people do, to go there and to find their old content.
Who wants to go
Thank
next?
you. Thank you, Tonya. I will look into that. It's a website that I can access.
Yeah, just look up Wayback Machine.
Okay. Thank you.
Whose turn is it next to answer the question? Michael, Mike, or Tonya?
Hey, I would say I'm still new to the industry, so and I got here unconventionally as well. So, it's all kind of new to me still, and I think it's still changing, and understanding one thing is, not coming from a media background, I didn't realize how competitive this industry really was. I just thought everybody, they smile on TV or whatever, but these guys are some super ultra competitive people, because a lot of these jobs, like you guys are saying, it's far few in between. A lot of times I'll walk around and, I'll share my story sometimes. A lot of times I try not to share my story because it's some people get jealous about it, like, hey, how did you get that job? And I'm like, well, I just got a call, and you know, it was God's plan, right? Just worked that way. And I'm like, oh man, I went to school for this and went to graduate school and still couldn't get that job. It's crazy how you got over me. I'm like, well, get better, right? So that's where I'm at. Like I said, I'm the sideline reporter for Toledo Football. So I'll actually hopefully catch up with Tonya out on the West Coast this weekend. Hopefully it ain't too hot, because I heard over there at Snapdragon Stadium it's kind of crazy over there. People passing out and stuff. What the heck? I'm like, I gotta stand on the sideline out there for it. It better not be hot. But and then like I said, in my job as a sideline analyst on the radio, it's only 100 jobs and in the country, for it. And I know Debbie, she can speak to the sports media world, and I don't look to advance. I just kind of look to just maintain and just continue to follow my lane. So I like I said, it's a constant change. I feel like you just got to just stay true to who you are.
Brian, restate the question for me again.
What has changed in journalism or PR since you started?
Oh yeah, we talked about that. Okay, so I wanted to get back to the podcasting, which I think has been huge too. Pretty much everything was covered, but really it has caught fire. I think the biggest technology piece has been now podcasts are visual. So on certain platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcast, those being visual too, and the way that they work well together. For instance, and I'll give you a great example. My favorite is I pitched one of my clients to a journalist with Black Enterprise, and not only did she do a story on her, but then she was on her podcast. So the journalist had a podcast, and she did a visual interview with her on the platform. Like, it was one of the most dynamic outcomes that I've seen for a good story. And I just think the ability to be, like she was saying earlier, creative in the storytelling piece and work with the journalists on their platform because they thought it was so such an amazing story. Those are the types of things for me that, and as a podcaster, being able to maybe supplement some of the stuff that the journalists are doing definitely gives us an opportunity to connect and work well together, right? And build that relationship and just be great for our client. So just watching some of the technology, the technical pieces kind of elevate over the last few years has been great to watch and play in. So for me, I think that's huge. And Mike, yes, we're gonna connect in the West Coast, and I can't wait. And it's cooling down, so I think you'll be all right. I think you'll be all right.
I would say for me, it's basically just been it's become more accessible to get a story out because Twitter came along, and Twitter wasn't in existence before, or I was, a photographer. So.
And another question: How can we get more women into journalism, or more racialized people into journalism or PR?
I'll speak. I think, there's a lot of programs to give journalists a first job. When I worked at the paper, we had a young journalist who he was like funded by the larger newspaper conglomerate. But, then your year ends and you don't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that the publication is going to hire you. So I think that more mentorship and sponsorship that is long term to get women and people of color, in jobs, because, you can't just give them an internship, even if it's paid, and then say, okay, now you're on your own. You need that nurturing and that growth and learning from other people to keep advancing.
I feel that also associations like the Women in Communication Association of Women in Communication South Florida chapter is great for the educational piece for all of those topics.
Thank you, Brent. I would agree with you on that 100%. Being part of the organization is humongous because for me, it's, you have resources that connect you nationally with women across the country who are journalists and publicists and working in communications, and the resources and the connections there are just invaluable. It's been huge. I'd also say that I think, I don't think a lot of people even really knew what public relations was up until maybe the last, maybe 10 years or so. You would say you were in PR or public relations, and people, I still don't know if everybody really knows what I do. But it's definitely not a career that everybody knew about. So I think just having more education on that end as well. Colleges have more programs for it than they did when I was in school. And so that's huge. And I keep preaching at every public speaking gig I do, and every time I train and everything, is to say that women need to jump into the metaverse and into Web 3.0 because we have a huge opportunity. Whereas there's a really large patriarchy in the real world, as I say, online and in the metaverse, women can create some equality and some equity and really jump in big ways that we don't have the opportunity to get in the door right now in other areas. So I think it's a huge opportunity for women, and there's a lot of publications, podcasts, blogs, different outlets that are in the metaverse on the blockchain right now. And if women can learn how to tap into that, I think that would be a really huge opportunity.
Amy?
Hey, I wanted to offer a counterpoint. Where are all the men? Because here's my question. Our journalism organization, as an example, we have way more women than we have men in it, which I'm not complaining about. But I just in terms of, you know, representing like your entire community and everybody in it. You know, I think men want to look up and see some men on the television screen too. So I think um, that goes back, in my opinion, to salaries. You know, that the salaries are just not enticing enough for some of these guys to take the jobs, I'm guessing. I mean, I don't know why else it seems that there's sort of a women dominant scene. But that's also upsetting too, because if salaries are the issue, then, you know, that means women are taking salaries that are not as great and that men are not even bothering with. So, you know, I guess I get back to salaries have to rise in some way in journalism to keep all of the candidates interested.
If I may say, you know, if you look at the major media, what do they call them? You know, the major media, New York Times, Washington Post, most of them, almost all of them. I think the Washington Post now has a woman editor, but so there may be women at the bottom and somewhat in the middle, but they're not at the top. Um, which is a few reasons, right? It's just, you know, in medicine, you have a choice, you know, you have this conflict between your career and your family, and women are still, you know, you mostly caretakers. So when you, as you go up the ladder, you know, and lawyers, you know, a lot of fields, you know, either women are not encouraged to keep going, they're not, they have a conflict with their, you know, reproductive years. I mean, look at Serena Williams. I read her interview cover story in the Time magazine, and she said, you know, well, my daughter wants me to have, you know, keeps asking me when am I going to have a little baby or brother. You know, so in addition to being 41 and playing tennis, she also has, you know, how many years to have more children. So it, you know, it's still a stark reality, I think, in the field. But saying that, you know, look at someone I had, you know, I have 4 kids, and when I had my last 2, which were twins, and I think maybe I have a similar story. Is it you, Tonya, who have twins? Uh, but when, you know, then it became much harder, even though I was still working to do the kind of journalism like for investigative pieces for and pitching them to the New York Times and Forbes. And I did take on some more content work. I mean, and then, you know, just everything changed. But I think, you know, you always have to be pivoting and you always have to be watching the current trends. And I think that Tanya's right that, and Jennifer, who's a Web3 enthusiast, is always saying, you know, that you can make money on your content. If I put it on Twitter, I'm not making money on it, but I am, you know, making a name for myself. But if whatever, I'm not sure how it's going to work. But if I do start using Web3, then maybe that same content that I might have put as a tweet could earn money. So I think, you know, in journalism and in PR, you know, everything's always changing. You have to be really watching what the next trend is and then jumping on if you can.
And the next question is, what was your first story in journalism or PR?
So I'll start my very first story in PR. Well, outside of college, because as I said, I started in promoting a play. But my actual real first story that I developed was for the Fort Lauderdale International Boat Show. And I had I mean, now I say the excitement, but at the time it was absolutely nerve wracking of being at the show when there was a hurricane. And we had to actually move these like multi-million-dollar yachts. I didn't have to move them. I'm not a yacht captain, but they had to move these yachts into storage facilities. People came in from all over the world. They were moving stuff out of there. Everyone in the city of Fort Lauderdale had lost power, and we came back with the boat show. And we had to meet with media and speak to media and talk to them about organizing this luxury boat show and, you know, taking police presence and all of that when people didn't have power and the community was in turmoil. And we had to create a story around that. And we worked with the boat show itself to donate concession stand profits and things like that in order to help the community, and really like built a campaign around that. And I think for me, it was like thrown into the deep end of public relations and crisis management, but it was a huge lesson for me in PR, and I think it really helped to launch my career overall.
Do any of the other panelists want to answer that question?
My
Sure.
first was volunteering with the community cable broadcasting, and I came into the studio one day, and I had no idea, I just came in for my shift, and basically they said, "Oh, we're going to Devon, which is a small town outside of Edmonton," and they said, "Yeah, we're just going to go on. Oh, by the way, you're hosting a show." So basically, I was given a microphone and there was a camera guy with me, and I just went to this town to interview all these different business people. And I was totally unprepared because I just found out basically on the ride over what I was doing. So there was no way to even figure out what I was going to ask people until I got there. So it went okay. People saw it and it was okay. But my first paid writing gig was for the Calgary Herald, and I did a feature on military mascots, actually naval mascots, and in Canada, and so that was my first one.
Rose?
Okay. My first story, I was a student at Columbia, and I covered the New York primary. And I had pitched ahead of time to cover it for the New York Amsterdam News, which is a paper in Harlem. So I covered that primary and wrote this piece, and that was my first. I think it was paid, but it was my first byline, I would say, in a major, in a media publication. And and then there were a lot of scoops, but those came a little later. So thank you.
So before we wrap up the space, does anyone have any questions?
This has been a great space, by the way. I learned so much. And I'm like DMing Amy. I'm like, I've been in your town once. I love your town. But
that was fun. Small world after all, right?
So I appreciate everyone here. And what I did was underneath the bubble, I just put everyone's website because Brent would be writing a blog, then we would publish it on the multi-site that I have. One of the site is his website, so we're developing his blog website, and so we're going to be blogging about the conversation, and we have everything recorded. And then we have someone in the space who want to ask some questions, but I think we're going to be running out of time. I'm gonna DM you, Jalal, because it's I think you're asking something that pertains to India, and we're in America and Canada, so I know some people over there, and I know some media, so I'm gonna help you with that offline. But again, we want to appreciate everyone for being here. And Brent, you want to do some closing thoughts, final thoughts?
Before we close this space, I'll say some final thoughts. I've learned a lot, and I think anyone can be in journalism or public relations. And can we have some closing thoughts from our panelists?
I just want to start by saying, as much as I've discussed salaries and the challenges, I do think the industry is paying attention and listening to what is happening and watching what's happening around it. And hopefully that will be a brighter scene. But if you have the passion to be a journalist, I don't want you to hear, oh, the salaries aren't going to get me where I want to go. Because in this age of people hopping jobs and switching paths, if you have the passion for journalism, we need you. Come while you're young and ready to work hard and see where it takes you. Because the one thing, yes, the salaries are lower, but you also can move up faster than you ever could before. So if you are one of those bright stars waiting to be discovered, it's worth taking the shot and coming in and seeing how quickly you can move. And if you can get yourself like so many others were saying, up to the bigger markets, there are bigger salaries there. So again, passion should lead, not dollar signs. And thank you guys for listening.
I'll go really quick. I wanted to say one of the best publicists I know is also a journalist. And she got into journalism just living in the space that she loved, which was sports fashion, whatever. So she does shoes, and so it's jazz if you've ever been to PR lunch hour. And that's because she writes in her authentic self. And I know many times people feel like, well, I don't have the technical training, but people want stories that connect. They want stories, and they want to hear something that stirs something in them. So I think regardless if you are in PR or you're a journalist, freelance, just continue to live in the space that you love, and it'll be enough. Never feel like you are not enough. We're not dealing with imposter syndrome here. We just need to embrace the fact that when we live in the space that we love, the content turns out in a way that allows for people to connect, and it resonates with the readers, and that's why they continue to follow you and support you and have great relationships with those on the opposite side of the table, because it will take your career, very far. So thank you for having me. I think this was great. I love being in this space with you all, and I hope we stay connected.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. Does anyone else have any closing final thoughts? Emily, Mike, Michael?
I think Rose has one.
Debbie or Tonya?
I think Rose has one. Her hands was up.
Hi.
Rose?
Okay. I just want to say that, like Amy, I would echo that if you have a passion to tell a story, go for it. And that was my passion. And even as I've been freelancing, my passion is also to tell a story. And I've been telling the story of Women to Follow. I've been telling women's stories who are not Michelle Obama, but who are leaders in law or leaders in virtual reality. And I've interviewed such amazing people, and I'm trying to build this idea through positive a way of naming women and interviewing women to show everybody what we can do. So and the other thing that's great about it is that, like, my piece that I did, investigative piece, it was heard, was listened to in Congress. Senate Foreign Relations Committee held hearings, and they changed the law. So being able to change the law and affect change is really gratifying. So if you love it, go for it. I think that Brent, you said anyone can be a journalist or a PR person. I don't know if anyone, I think you need some training. So thank you.
I think you need a little bit of tough skin as well, because I'm probably the one here who got into the business when I was the only female, and I had there were no other women in the NHL, in the locker room that I was in anyway. And so today, it's, even if there's just one person that is representative of someone out there, hang on to that person, because it just shows anybody can do it. I just would not take no for an answer. I was so fortunate that I had two amazing mentors, male mentors, that opened the door for me. And it was up to me to walk through it and push it further. So you're going to get a lot of doors slammed in your face. So it's up to you whether you decide to continue, but you've got to have a thick skin. You're going to go through some shit, part of my language, but but just keep on doing it, because the other side, you meet so many amazing people, and even if the pay sucks, there's something about journalism and PR that it's a privilege to be able to work in the space and tell people stories.
Does anyone else have any final thoughts before we close the space?
I just want to say thank you, everybody. I appreciate you all dropping your knowledge, and I just say positive vibes only. Stay positive.
Michael or Emily?
I'll just jump in to say the same thing. It's a tough job on both ends, journalism and public relations. And kudos to everyone who has stuck through it and through these hard times and everything changing year after year, and minute by minute in these industries. And I think it's amazing to have such a strong community and to be able to tap into conversations like this and talk to everybody and build these relationships. And just a big thank you to you, Brent, for putting this on tonight.
You're welcome. And Michael?
Brent, thank you for having me up. I appreciate the invite. Really appreciate it, for reals. Thanks.
And I want to thank Terry for being here too. Not only for the mindfulness exercise, but staying in the space and listening. Do you have a final, Terry?
I think her phone is stuck.
And last but least, my co-host Tonya. Do you have a final thought, Tonya, before we close the space?
Now, my final thoughts is collaboration. What you think you might know, you never know, and always get a mentor or mentor someone. I think it's the most important thing, because I mentor because just in case I forget. I worry about forgetting. So if I forget, I might as well teach everything I know. Then this way, if I have to ask someone that I just taught, then at least I know that they will be able to help me with it. So always find yourself someone to mentor and also be mentored, because I don't think I had a Carolyn Fisher who was my mentor, who owned Fisher Communication, who taught me everything in media buying, press releases, and all the different things. And then I went on to mentor a whole bunch of other students and my interns. So again, it's a give and take. It's a circle of life, as they call it. But always find yourself a mentor and be the mentor to someone else. My final thoughts.
And I want to now thank everyone for being part of the panel. And I really enjoyed hosting this very important panel, because this discussion is a needed discussion, so that people are educated as to what the differences of journalism and PR are.
Thank you, Brent.
You're welcome. And as always, thank you, Tonya, for sponsoring my show and being my co-host and live streaming for me.
And Brent, as always, your success is my success. Everybody have a great night. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye, guys.